Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Throne of Steel episode number 172 based on novel. So let's start. Right after Li Xingxi was done speaking, Chen Yinga suddenly opened her eyes and showed him a sweet smile, giving the reply, "Done." Saying that, Chen Yinga lifted her hands and extended her fingertip, pointing her palms upwards, as if releasing something. Immediately, roars from myriad beasts came gushing out from her body like a tsunami, but moreover, it was accompanied with the images of countless magical beasts coming out behind Chen Yinga's back. Is that a domain? But how could a domain need such a long chant? Li Xingxi recognized in a glance a powerful summoner domain. Could that be the same beast emperor domain as her grandfather? Chen Yinga had displayed the use of her domain in the previous matches, but only in the shape of single-targeted amplifications of magical beasts, aimed at most at two targets, but seeing such a large area extended domain from her was really a first. The next instant after Li Xingxi was filled with those questions, his look changed. Light gates surfaced in an orderly manner behind Chen Yinga's back. Seeing these, the most shocked were no one else but those from her own spiritual temple. Even the head of the spiritual temple Chen Hongyu was dumbstruck by this scene. He never thought his own granddaughter to be able to utilize such a magic. He was also puzzled over why Chen Yinga had been chanting for so long. Even after having been in control of the spiritual temple for so many years, he had no memories of such a long chant from their spiritual temple. Even summoning a magical beast of the 9th step wouldn't need so long. Otherwise, in the battlefield, a summoner had the time to die 100 times in the lapse of 3 minutes. Right now, Chen Hongyu was really crushed by his own granddaughter. And the same went for every present summoners, who never expected a single summoner to be able to display a strength reaching such a peak. Just count these gates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Counting them in a glance was simply impossible. These gates formed an immense semicircular shape, as if surrounding and protecting Chen Yinga. In the midst of those myriad beasts' roars, all the light gates opened at the same time, letting magical beasts come out one after another from within. There were a total of 36 light gates, from whence 36 magical beasts immediately came out right upon appearance. Seeing these magical beasts, Li Xingxi's look became slightly better. They only reached the 8th step and not the 9th. If Chen Yinga was able to summon 36 magical beasts equivalent to powerhouses of the 9th step at once, that would really be overly terrifying. But even so, Chen Yinga summoning magic still shocked the whole audience. 36 simultaneous magical beasts of the 8th step, what was that? That would be enough to turn the tides in a whole portion of the battlefield in just a few instants. So Bright Glimmer of Hope's most powerful member was this summoner? The other members of Bright Glimmer of Hope had their own conclusion on whether Chen Yinga was the most powerful, but one thing was certain, she was a god's chosen one just like Long Haochen and Kia. Even if she may not have earned as much as Long Haochen and Kia in these years, she was in no way inferior. This summon before her eyes had depleted all her spiritual energy, but what if she had her saint spiritual robe? Would the chanting time even be so long? And the same goes for her spiritual energy. Even Long Haochen hadn't had a clear understanding of Chen Yinga's real strength. Right now Bright Glimmer of Hope could already be said to have in some meaning 3 cores, one of them being Chen Yinga. In the previous match, Chen Yinga had exercised great restraint, but finally came out with her full strength when facing Li Xingxi. After returning the day before, the members of Bright Glimmer of Hope convened a simple meeting, as they were certain to run against Li Xingxi on today. But how should they counter him? They very rapidly reached a conclusion: no matter who encounters Li Xingxi, that person has, while making an all-out effort in battle, to deplete to the greatest extent the opponent's strength. After all, even though Li Xingxi's strength was not at Yang Haoyu's level, it should not differ too much. It was because the other side let him win that Long Haochen had managed to win against Yang Haoyu, but in a 1 versus 1, Haochen was not confident in being able to surely defeat Li Xingxi. But their Demon Hunt squad Bright Glimmer of Hope was a whole, and a whole was bound to be even stronger than separate individuals. And since the individual competition would end today anyway, better focus on the team battles. Zhong Fangfang had previously effectively depleted Li Xingxi, but since a lot of matches had gone on since then, his spiritual energy should have already gotten replenished. But in this match, Chen Yinga had already resolved herself to at least make Li Xingxi use up the overwhelming majority of his fighting strength if she could not defeat him. Chen Yinga's plan went on right off the bat, making plentiful use of Li Xingxi's high esteem of his status to complete her summoning spell of largest scale. 36 magical beasts of the 8th step appearing in the stadium simultaneously had absolutely shaken the whole audience. Although these magical beasts were of different races, they listened wholeheartedly to Chen Yinger's orders. Right off the bat, they madly charged at Li Xingxi. Li Xingxi snorted coldly. Mere magical beasts reaching the 8th step were nothing in his eyes. Even if they were even more numerous, at his cultivation level, killing magical beasts at this level was just too simple. As he waved his hands, the massive green figure on his back immediately drifted away, both hands raised to the sky releasing green moon-shaped blades. It appeared like an uncrossable barrier standing in front of Li Xingxi. But his look grew unsightly once again the next instant. Chen Yinger issued a shriek, and immediately, the myriad beasts' images that had come out previously solidified, rushing at the magical beasts of the 8th step that had surged out and attached themselves onto them, causing the beasts to start undergoing rapid changes. A gigantic black bear bellowed loudly, swelling to twice its previous size, growing twice as large, as its hairs astonishingly started to turn into a dark gold color. In the midst of roars, it let out terrifying seismic waves aimed at the wind god called out by Li Xingxi. Evolution. What Chen Yinger had utilized was obviously not the same myriad beasts domain as Chen Hongyu, but her mythologic beast domain. Being the beast god's chosen one, the unique saint spiritual daughter to have come in existence in the human world, her boosting ability on magical beasts fundamentally even exceeded Yi Xiaolei's back in the illusory paradise. Under the boost of the beast emperor domain, these magical beasts of the 8th step all evolved to the 9th step, turning into 36 magical beasts of the 9th step, releasing a terrible might which frantically pounced on Li Xingxi. A miscalculation. Li Xingxi had immediately come to this judgment, causing him to have traces of regrets. He really should not have let Chen Yinger complete her previous magic. 36 magical beasts of the 9th step and 36 magical beasts of the 8th step were two fundamentally different concepts. After completion of these global boosts, Chen Yinger sat down in a quite weakened state, but still had the energy to ferociously utter, "Everyone, get rid of him." 36 magical beasts of the 9th step pouncing on a single opponent was a really spectacular sight. The pair of massive moon-shaped blades in the wind god's hands managed to stop the attack of 3 magical beasts of the 9th step, but then started to get somewhat unstable. 9th step would be the assessment based on human cultivation, but in terms of magical beast grade, these would be magical beasts of the 10th rank. They may not be as strong as the 4-headed Medusa or divine unicorn, but as magical beasts of 10th rank, they still reach the peak of magical beasts. Simply said, right now it was as if Li Xingxi was assaulted by the whole Golden Foundation Knight Regiment. That lineup didn't feel any easier to face. Not daring to take things easy, Li Xingxi immediately unleashed the Wind God domain, not daring to let these 36 magical beasts of the 9th step unleash all their power. If it really went like that, himself aside, even the Demon God Emperor could find that situation troublesome. Right now, Li Xingxi completely flared up. A strong display of power immediately surged out, as a terrible hurricane immediately swept all the 36 magical beasts of the 9th step. Immediately, the beast's attacks got twisted aside while slowing down under the hurricane's effects. This was not a simple domain. For constricting so many magical beasts of the 9th step, that could only be a domain technique. For the sake of safety, and to make sure to achieve victory in this match, Li Xingxi had no other choice but to utilize his own domain technique. That terrible hurricane was entirely colored dark green. Everywhere it passed, every magical beast it encountered was getting cut frantically. If these were magical beasts of the 8th step, their bodies would certainly get smashed to pieces under attacks at this level. But magical beasts of the 9th step were not the same, their defensive power was far stronger than at the 8th step, so there was no immediate danger for them. Chen Yinger ignored this situation, only silently sitting there to replenish her spiritual energy, the little pig McDull being held in her arms. Li Xingxi having restricted these magical beasts thanks to his domain technique, his Wind God summoning's power started to emerge. With the boost from the Wind God domain, Li Xingxi's Wind God incarnated body gained an explosive burst in speed and offensive power. In a flash of green light, the gigantic bear stood like nothing in its way, while in response his incarnation got repelled 10 meters back in the blast of the bear's palm attack. But in front of the Wind God domain's amplification, an attack of this level was nothing. The look on Li Xingxi's face did not improve just because of getting rid of one magical beast of the 9th step. Quite the opposite, it got even more strained. A domain technique's spiritual energy consumption could only be described as terrifying, even with his internal spiritual energy having already broken through 400,000, he couldn't keep utilizing it for too long. He had only one choice left now, which would be to take advantage of the situation to get rid of Chen Yinger. This way these magical beasts would go out of control, causing a better turn for his situation. But Chen Yinga could not be killed as this temple's great gathering was no battle of life or death. So in some meaning, Chen Yinga was making perfect use of the rules. So, he could currently not attack Chen Yinga, as a summoner's body was the weakest, causing Li Xingji to really fear killing carelessly such a genius. But unless Chen Yinga was killed, these magical beasts wouldn't go out of control. If they kept besieging him, even if getting rid of the majority was possible, that would take him just far too long. Furthermore, the summoning spell having been completed, these 36 light gates closed up and disappeared, but these magical beasts wouldn't return to their original dwellings unless Chen Yinga consented. Thus, killing them was the only way to conclude this battle. Having come to this accurate conclusion, Li Xingji didn't show any more hesitation. Crossing his hands in front of him, two glistening green surges of light flared out from his eyes. A frantic fighting intent rose from Li Xingji, the hurricanes from the domain technique deriving from the wind god domain suddenly slowing down. That wind god summon's body swiftly returned to Li Xingji, and unexpectedly enveloped him inside before shrinking and making its way inside Li Xingji's body. Right now, Li Xingji's body was entirely colored a dazzling green. His right hand shot up, a palm-sized wind blade came flying out, appearing unstable, and visibly constituted of green wind. In a blink of an eye, it landed against a magical beast of the 9th step which had its speed slowed down greatly as a result, just as if it had fallen in a quagmire. But even so, what could a mere wind blade produce for a magical beast of the 9th step other than tickles? But the next instant, Li Xingji displayed the power of his second domain technique. With a light pop, that green-colored wind blade nimbly made way into the body of the magical beast of 9th step, and a second later, the latter turned into a green color, eyes flushed green, and abruptly blasted apart, not even leaving any splatter of flesh, just disappearing in the midst of these wind blades. This is... Chen Yinga was dumbstruck because she did not understand at all what Li Xingji just did. While she was so shocked, Li Xingji's hands shot in succession, releasing similar wind blades as just before. The results were identical. Everywhere these wind blades passed, no magical beast of the 9th step could bear the attack, all of them went extinct in a cold breeze, leaving not even a corpse behind. The look in Long Haochen's eyes was extremely heavy, gradually seeing through some of the mysteries behind Li Xingji's second domain technique. The true essence of wind. He has already grasped the true essence of wind. What's the true essence of wind? That's freedom. By causing the freedom displayed in wind to rise to the peak, this second domain technique was created. Right, this second domain technique used by Li Xingji was called freedom. Over 30 magical beasts of the 9th step dissipated in this freedom. And when the final one dissipated, Li Xingji's body swayed, but the look in his eyes was still as grave. Letting out a tyrannical roar, McDull in Chen Yinga's bosom leaped up, enlarging in the blink of an eye. The instant it landed onto the ground, a lot of eyes turned toward Chen Hongyu unwittingly. That's because McDull had just transformed into Chen Hongyu's contracted magical beast, a four-headed chimera. Groa. For Spitz bombarded straight onto the wind god domain. But as McDull was just shape-shifting, his strength differed quite importantly with a real four-headed chimera, so these four spits didn't make one, but were only thrown separately. But, even so, that attack reached the 9th step. However, the domain technique derived from the wind god domain was indeed powerful. When these four spits came in, they were immediately first slowed down by the hurricanes, before immediately breaking down and turning into nothingness. Lifting his hand, Li Xingji formed another wind blade in his palm, calmly declaring to Chen Yinga, "I don't want to cause your contracted summon's death. Just surrender." Seeing the cold look in Li Xingji's eyes, Chen Yinga slowly stood up and snorted, "If equipment were allowed, you would not necessarily have achieved victory against me." Li Xingji smiled to that, but didn't say anything. As a senior, he couldn't say likewise, "My equipment is not below yours." The green wind blade in his hand came flying, rushing straight toward McDull. Chen Yinga had a fright. After so many magical beasts of the 9th step had just gotten killed by these regular-looking wind blades, she really did not dare to gamble with McDull's life, and hurriedly shouted, "I concede." The wind blade dissipating in the air, Li Xingji's domain instantly vanished, leaving him looking obviously pale, although his footstep was still rather steady. Chen Yinga tiredly returned to her comrade's side, pouting and visibly dissatisfied with the results of her battle. "Boss, do you think that with my best setup, I could have had better chances to achieve victory?" Long Haochen smiled to that, "Don't be so displeased. Li Xingji's cultivation is really at a formidable level. You already did very well, Yinga." Although he didn't really know to which extent Li Xingji was really exhausted, the use of the latter's domain plus 2 domain techniques should have come with a considerable consumption. At least, Li Xingxi couldn't possibly get back to his optimum state before his next match. Bright Glimmer of Hope had another member eliminated, but no one found Chen Yinger's performance to be a loser's. She had just summoned 36 magical beasts of the 9th step. That was more than enough to withstand a Demon Emperor Legion. A summoner reaching such a state could already not simply be said to have reached the peak level. The flash of light landed this time on Lin Xin, opposing him with a knight. The strongest ones in the Night Temples were Yang Haoyu and Long Qianying, who were already eliminated, but the Night Temple still had 2 contestants in this 5th round. From this, one could well imagine how powerful these knights were. Lin Xin was on the verge of facing a domain-wielding Holy Knight of the 9th step. Entering the stage, Lin Xin's expression immediately became all the more serious. He knew that this was going to be his greatest hurdle since the start of the temple's great gathering. No matter whether he could win, he had to give his all, and do his best to weaken his opponent. Although this opponent was from the Night Temple, at least 3 people from their side would very likely emerge. So, weakening the opponent would serve well as setup for his comrades' later stages. Although, of course, the best would be to win against the opponent. The Holy Knight was very old, both hair and beard colored white. His age did not look any lower than Long Qianying's. In front of Lin Xin, he did not immediately summon his mount. Lifting his left hand to summon a brilliant colored shield, he permeated it with the power of spiritual highland. This was a guardian knight, looking impassable. Facing the opponent, Lin Xin suddenly had a strange feeling, because he realized with surprise that even after so many rounds had passed, this Holy Knight should have made it here with formidable displays of power, yet he hadn't left any impression in his heart. What could it mean that he managed to make it here in such a low-key fashion? A Guardian Knight should not be expert in fighting a duel, therefore that was a hidden card of the Night Temple. After Yang Haoyu had now come such a low-key and powerful Guardian Knight. Truly, the Night Temple deserved the #1 rank out of the Temple Alliance. So, perhaps even without the emergence of the Bright Glimmer of Hope, the Mage Temple would hardly have managed to overwhelm the Night Temple. And that was under the premise that only one of their 3 divine knights had come. These years, the Mage Temple could be said to have had unlimited prospects, especially after the Holy War, because the damage they had sustained was the lowest, their achievements in the battlefield the greatest, their development making the Night Temple completely pale in comparison. But when it really came to this temple's great gathering, the knights really had the strongest hidden trumps in the battle, determining the 6 great temples' rankings. If not for Bright Glimmer of Hope's presence, the Night Temple would be 80% sure of remaining in the lead. Lin Xin's eyes flashed in blue light, a pair of immense fire wings growing from his back. His spiritual wings were greatly different compared to ordinary mags, first and foremost in their size. The size of one's spiritual wings generally related with one's strength. Long Haochen's multiple wings being a special case, generally the size of one's spiritual wings would increase as one's cultivation grows. But even if Lin Xin had just recently broken through the 9th step, the size of his spiritual wings could already match with the wind wings of the Mage Temple's head Li Xingxi. The immense wings unfolded, extending out over 10 meters. It appeared just like a firewall extending from behind his back. Furthermore, the fire on Lin Xin's spiritual wings appeared in the form of blue flames. As his cultivation had kept going up, going past the 9th step, his heart of fire gained a fascinating tinge of beauty. As his spiritual wings moved rhythmically, a shallow blue color kept getting altered, just like the most limpid coast. Lin Xin's hands were joined up, his eyes glinting up. Lifting his hand, a flame headed a probing attack at that Holy Knight. Bang! As the blue fire curled up, the Holy Knight stood unmoving, and the flame collided with his shield, but did not infect him, nor did it even manage to make it past that shield materialized from spiritual highland. This first attack was only filled with explosive properties, and as a fire mage, his greatest field lay in the explosive power in his attack. This was a battle between the strongest spear and the sturdiest shield. Lin Xin continued his global offenses with no hesitation. As his hands were waved about, series of blue flames were shot at the Holy Knight like blue lightning bolts. The Holy Knight's left foot pushed forward slightly, taking a half step as he allowed Lin Xin to attack, quickly raising and lowering the shield to block every single heart of fire flame. In fact, Lin Xin's current heart of fire attacks all reached the spiritual highland integration level, yet it did not inflict any damage to him. This could only mean that this Holy Knight undoubtedly had unique attainments in his defense. One could see an inconspicuous golden halo released under the Holy Knight's feet, revolving around his body and extending to a range of 5 meters with rhythmic movements. The golden halo had slight changes of color every time it extended under his feet. Without paying enough attention, one wouldn't notice, but that was a kind of special golden color, a hybrid, multicolored, gold. A domain. That was the Holy Knight's domain, though certainly an inconspicuous one. Even if after so many fights some people saw through the fact that this was a domain, not a lot of people really remembered him. If one had to describe this Holy Knight in a simple expression, that would be, as steady as a mountain. No matter how hard you'll attack, my defense will remain unmoving. Lin Xin did not know what uses his opponent's domain had, but his highly invasive Heart of Fire was completely unable to trespass his shield. He also attempted to make his Heart of Fire attack from other angles, but at that time the other party utilized Shield Wall. Lin Xin's attacks were really pretty to see, filling the sky with blue lights gathered against a target, just like a magic cannon firing at its target. Spiritual Highland rapidly depleting one's spiritual energy. This magic show of Lin Xin's was especially costly in spiritual energy, but there was still a gap between a forbidden spell and that. It could usually very easily catch the opponent unprepared, but such an ultra-defensive opponent was really hard to deal with. Although Lin Xin did not know how fast this opponent's spiritual energy was depleted, from the fact he had made use of a domain, his spiritual energy ought to reach at least 200,000. Such a battle of endurance would only make things even more unfavorable to him. So what's to be done? Lin Xin pondered, suddenly ceasing to launch attacks. No longer having to sustain the attacks from Heart of Fire really gave a restful feeling to this Holy Knight. On the other side, blue fire was lingering on Lin Xin's body, as he visibly recovered spiritual energy with his full force. Recovering in the midst of battle? The Holy Knight didn't know whether to laugh or to cry for a moment. Could it be that this kid believes that I really don't have the slightest capability? I'm a knight of the 9th step no matter what you say. The Holy Knight's hand was raised up, and in the midst of a downcast chant, a light magic formed. But, in the end, a Guardian Knight was a Guardian Knight. There's no way he could rival a Retribution Knight in executing offensive abilities. It looked as though a light of trial was gradually taking shape in front of the chanting Holy Knight. But suddenly, a blue light was shot out, slamming against his shield, and moreover, another blue trail made a detour to attack at the Holy Knight's back. Although the Holy Knight didn't look troubled resisting these attacks, in practice Lin Xin's spiritual Highland-based magic attacks were really terrible. How could they be so easy to defend against? He really didn't dare let Lin Xin's attacks reach him. Left without choice, the Holy Knight could only interrupt Light of Trial to use a shield wall in defense. Catching sight of this scene, Lin Xin couldn't help but leak out a faint smile. Everyone had their domain of expertise, and in the same way, also had their weaknesses. This Holy Knight's defense was absolutely great, even exceeding Long Houchen without his Light God domain. But his attack was his weak point. With this knowledge, Lin Xin thought of a countermeasure. His previous barrage of attacks slowed down, and his Heart of Fire would be launched only after gaps of 1 second every time. His aim was very simple, to force his opponent to maintain his shield formed of spiritual Highland, but without devoting too much to attacking. This way, his consumption was greatly reduced, and thanks to his massive fire wings, his spiritual energy recovery became even faster than his opponent's. Thus, this battle of offense and defense turned into a war of attrition. The Holy Knight's domain was called Highland Domain, coming out from his own research. This Holy Knight with a gentle disposition specialized in defending, and as a result, chose to single-handedly focus his cultivation in defense. He used to be a demon hunter, but was not the captain of his team. Although he was strong enough, his character was overly soft, and he did not have a lot of offensive means, neither was he willing to learn attacks. In his matches, his opponents were either far weaker than him, or had to concede after having their spiritual energy depleted completely. His Highland domain was highly specialized in reinforcing his spiritual Highland while reducing its consumption. The reinforcement of the defensive power of his spiritual Highland went to the extent of reaching the domain technique level. Inside the Knight Temple, this Holy Knight had the title of Ultimate Shield, and had a shield of epic tier. In the Holy War, he had gone on many battles, facing the demon god of death, Saminaga, and the bear demon god, Vale. Thanks to his formidable defensive power, the two demon gods were left without ways to get him, making him a heroic contributor to the Knight Temple. Adding his gentle disposition to that, his relationship with the people from the Knight Temple was fabulous, bringing him to an equal footing compared to the Divine Knights. Seeing Lin Xin's shameless method against him, the Holy Knight couldn't help but break out in laughter. Only, Lin Xin's cultivation really was too lacking to defeat him. The reason why he hadn't summoned his mount was out of fear that it wouldn't be able to resist Lin Xin's attacks. After all, this really hot Heart of Fire formed with spiritual Highland really had a terrifying offensive power. Wielding his shield, the Holy Knight started to assault Lin Xin. His speed didn't look too fast, but his advance was extremely stable. When he moved, Lin Xin responded immediately, attempting to increase the distance between the two of them. But to his astonishment, the Holy Knight started to change his course as he kept approaching Lin Xin. Very quickly, the distance between the two of them was reduced to 100 meters. This time, the Holy Knight suddenly stopped in his steps. Moving aside the shield in front of him, he exposed a warm smile to Lin Xin. Immediately, a white glow was instantly shot onto Lin Xin. Lin Xin nearly cried out a curse, Saint Spiritual Stove. Never did he expect this elder to actually possess a terrible trump such as a Saint Spiritual Stove. The two great abilities Attraction and Pull simultaneously made effects on Lin Xin. The Saint Spiritual Stove was obviously trained to the highest level by this knight. How could he not have a tool such as a Saint Spiritual Stove to accompany such a powerful defense? Only with a Saint Spiritual Stove to match with his Spiritual Highland could he become the greatest defender in the battlefields. Lin Xin was no match for the Holy Knight in cultivation level. About to get pulled in little by little, even if the opposite Holy Knight was not expert in close-distance battle, that was not someone a mage could contend against in a head-on clash. The goal of the Saint Spiritual Stove was naturally not to defeat him instantly in close quarters, but to stop him from deploying all his strength. That was the reason for the smile the Holy Knight displayed to Lin Xin. Come. Having reached this far, Lin Xin knew already that he could in no way achieve victory anymore. This instant, he had a monstrous feeling fill him. So far, he had been believing himself to be considerably powerful, having at his disposal not only his great burst power as a fire mage but also the powerful boost from Heart of Fire. Now he finally understood that when encountering a real powerhouse, his offensive power was still far from enough. Unless he trained to the level of being able to use a domain of his own, he had a lot more efforts to put into the field of magic. While in the midst of being continuously pulled in the air, Lin Xin suddenly came to a stop. A resonant phoenix cry reverberated from his chest, and immediately, Lin Xin's body disappeared. His pair of immense blue spiritual wings enlarged once again, and in the blink of an eye, formed an immense blue phoenix charging straight at the Holy Knight. The Holy Knight had a chill, finding out with shock that the heat was not only external, but even growing deep in his heart. What a powerful fire! Too late to think further, he deployed the Highland domain to its greatest extent, bowing and launching shield wall as well as divine obstruction. It seemed the blue fire phoenix was about to strike the shield wall. But suddenly, that massive phoenix shrank by nearly a half. The drifting Heart of Fire vanished entirely, causing it to no longer look like a body made of energy, but like a real body. Bang! As the blue fire phoenix finally clashed with the shield walls, a terrifying scene took place. In the instant of the clash, the Holy Knight's shield turned all blue, the same blue as Heart of Fire's color. In a violent clash, the Holy Knight's body fell back in response, dropping to the ground. The bang was not only one sound, but occurred in quick successions. Bang sounded out thunderously. With every bang, the Holy Knight's shield wall was repelled further and further. When the ninth explosion sounded out, he was already propelled to the edge of the field, back facing the defensive barrier of the stadium. Shield wall was condensed out of Spiritual Highland, its defensive power even further reinforced by the Highland domain. But if one paid careful attention, they would notice the current shield wall was turning liquid, that liquid clearly being spiritual energy. And it was blue in color as well. One could clearly see that the shield wall amplified by the domain was unexpectedly growing thinner and thinner, faintly transparent and even letting the Holy Knight's silhouette come to view. A domainless powerhouse managed to compel a domain-wielding powerhouse to such an extent through his own attacks. This was already enough for Lin Xin to take pride. This blue fire phoenix spiritual stove's offensive power was a really shocking thing. The blue light vanished, and a blue fire phoenix came flying. It was clearly quite weakened, and the blue fire on his body gained in transparency, looking close to going extinct at any time. But, right at this time, that blue phoenix opened its mouth and let out a resonant phoenix cry. It formed 3 blue lines tracing from its body, all drilling their way into the shield walls. The first blue needle striking shield wall caused numerous ripples to appear on the wall, making it seem more transparent. But that blue needle also vanished without a trace, followed by the second one which was thrust, finally surpassing shield wall's limits. A small hole appeared, but the instant it appeared, that second needle broke into pieces. However, the third needle followed quickly, disappearing in the midst of the shield wall instantly. Letting out a groan, the Holy Knight staggered to the side, and the shield wall thereupon ceased. With a flash of blue light, Lin Xin fell to the ground out of nowhere, standing half-squatted on a single leg. Pushing his left hand onto the ground to support the rest of his body, his dark green hair looked messy, and his body was shaking lightly, his look just as pale as a sheet of paper. Ever since reaching the 9th step of cultivation, this was his first time pushing Blue Fire Phoenix to such a level. The final 3 blue rays were undoubtedly his ultimate trump. Mixing a fire of darkness with his own Heart of Fire's attack, he obtained an ultra-powerful penetrative force. After the Blue Fire Phoenix spiritual stove had consumed the spiritual Highland-infused shield wall to the greatest extent, this final move would be the crucial point in determining whether he would achieve victory or not. Since a battle of attrition was no longer possible, he could only aim to obtain victory with his strongest attack. Regardless of the final result, at least Lin Xin would have displayed the most of his ability. The Holy Knight's face did not look any better off than Lin Xin's. On his right chest, dual green and blue flames were rising up, and his left hand was being used to cover his right chest with a resplendent golden light. But those green and blue flames burnt extremely obstinately, appearing to seep out through the gaps in the knight's fingers, the latter showing a very pained face. Lin Xin was gasping intensely for breaths, barely managing to look into the Holy Knight's face. Of course, he knew how powerful his ultimate move formed of these mixed flames was. Extinguishing them wouldn't be so simple, and even if the Holy Knight finally succeeded, that would cause his spiritual energy to drop to the brink of nothing, leaving him with no possibility to keep going in the tournament. I concede. Youngster, retrieve your magical ability please. The Holy Knight declared with a pained look. That battle, and moreover in a great shape. With a lift of his right hand, his fire cloud crystal appeared, used at once as a walking stick to approach the Holy Knight. Pressing his right hand onto the elder's chest, he absorbed back the dual flames along with the hellfire needles. During the process of absorption, Lin Xin was slightly startled, because he found out that the true damage sustained by the Holy Knight was not as great as he had expected. There was a scorched area on his chest, but in truth, the hellfire needles might never have truly made way into his body. The Holy Knight blinked his eyes at him, before returning staggeringly to the lounge area. Lin Xin immediately understood that the counterpart was throwing the game. Even while under the boost of his Highland domain, he had clearly blocked the last attack from the Hellfire Needle, yet voluntarily revealed a look of being unable to endure, offering him this victory. When Lin Xin returned to the lounge under the support of the Fire Cloud staff, that Holy Knight was seen nodding lightly, a look of admiration on his face. The old knight revealed a faint smile, then shut his eyes to recuperate his spiritual energy. Lin Xin sat on his seat, glancing unconsciously at Long Haochen, who smiled to him, but didn't say anything, only hinting that he should hasten his spiritual energy recovery. Still other matches had yet to come after this victory. But very clearly, even though Lin Xin could keep down the backlash of his Blue Fire Phoenix spiritual stove, he was well afraid that he would be unable to keep using it in the following matches. Bright Glimmer of Hope's luck was really SOSO in this individual competition, but they had secretly gained the full support of the Knight Temple, this influence having benefited them the most in the match between Haochen and Yang Haoyu. The support of the most powerful knight and greatest shield paved their way in the later stages of the competition. If Yang Haoyu had really gone all out in his match, Long Haochen would have undoubtedly been defeated, and as the captain of Bright Glimmer of Hope, his elimination would be a severe blow to the whole Bright Glimmer of Hope. But Yang Haoyu let him win, not only giving him comprehension of a lot of aspects of domains, but moreover fostering his reputation. The competition was now reaching the 5th round, with only 20 contestants left. One could say that the later matches would determine the final ranking of Bright Glimmer of Hope's side. The Holy Knight with the title of Supreme Shield having ingeniously offered victory to Lin Xin, not only offered a great amount of points to Bright Glimmer of Hope, but also a seat in the top 6. Although Chen Yinga had lost her match, she had also used up Li Xingji's strength to a great extent. Lin Xin having advanced, and Bright Glimmer of Hope still having 3 great powerhouses that had yet to take part, one could say that they had a bright later stage of the competition ahead. The bright light of selection flashed once again, this time selecting the blood-reeking war goddess of Bright Glimmer of Hope. As it happens, Wang Yuanyuan's opponent turned out to be a spatial mage of the 9th step from the Mage Temple, and a domain wielder as well. The look in her eyes flickering, Wang Yuanyuan slowly trailed into the field. Although the opponents she had encountered weren't especially powerful, they were still in the upper tier of this competition. So Wang Yuanyuan could really be said to have cut her way through thistles and thorns to finally reach this point. She had a very serene look, but a single-minded expression in her eyes. When gazing at the distant old mage, she performed a simple warrior salute. The old mage returned the salute as well. Having reached the 5th round of battles, every match was now extremely important. On the Mage Temple's side, Li Xingxi had already made it to the 6th round. If they could have someone else make it so far, at least the Mage Temple would still be able to threaten the Knight Temple. So, eliminating all the Mage Temple's contestants would benefit them the most. Starting at incantation, the old mage lifted his right hand, pointing toward Wang Yuanyuan. In the meantime, the air twisted slightly, as the old mage's figure disappeared without basis. He really did not underestimate Wang Yuanyuan in the least. He utilized his domain right off the bat because he had already observed Wang Yuanyuan's strength, and was aware that this young girl was a domain-wielding powerhouse as well, thus he made the first move to take the advantage. Thin silver light floated on the twisting air, extending throughout the field. The spatial element was full of indeterminacy, anything would get greatly affected inside that kind of domain. Wang Yuanyuan still stood unmoving as a blood-red radiance, the blood domain, extended under her feet. The blood domain spread out, but only extended to the 3 meters around Wang Yuanyuan. Surrounded by blood-colored curls, that blood-reeking war goddess shone brightly. The old mage kept chanting in a downcast manner, but his voice seemed to be reverberating from all directions, after going through his constantly refracting domain. Wang Yuanyuan had no way to tell his true location. The twisting spatial domain started to show changes, and some silver light started to arise within as some cracks immediately appeared. Those black cracks looked like rapacious mouths, ready to engulf Wang Yuanyuan's body at any time. The cracks started to grow more and more numerous, and the space in the whole stadium was lacerated fiercely by this terrifying spatial force, looking able to possibly shatter at any time. From the looks of it, Wang Yuanyuan seemed to be forced into a completely passive situation. But what no one understood was that she had yet to make any move up to now, aside from releasing her blood domain. Outside of their field of view, Wang Yuanyuan's pair of eyes concealed in the blood domain were releasing a different color than the red from the previous blood domain. It was a silver color characteristic of the spatial attribute. Her most attention-taking feature in the temple's Great Gatherings individual competition was this peculiar blood domain, but don't forget that she's also a warrior using the spatial attribute. Soft spiritual energy fluctuations circulated through the air as a breathtaking splendor shone in Long Haochen's eyes, as he excitedly watched the field. He had guessed the reason why Wang Yuanyuan had yet to make a move from the start. She only wanted to aim for a victory in one blow. Success would end in her victory, or if not, it will end in her defeat. Bright Glimmer of Hope could really be called an exceptional group, and luckily, all of them had already broken through the 9th step, some even getting domains of their own. But they lacked in experience as powerhouses, the speed of their growth was just too fast. Though their cultivation already reached the 9th step, some of them had not even experienced battles at the 8th step. To some extent they were certainly lacking in strength compared to those experienced veterans of the 6 great temples who wielded domains of their own. It was visible in Lin Xin's previous match, opposing him to the Supreme Shield Knight, that he had a clear inferiority in this standard. As for now, Wang Yuanyuan's opponent was no easy prey. By clashing head-on right off the bat, Wang Yuanyuan's odds of success would really not be high. This video will end here.